The human soldier sat in the cockpit of his ship, staring at the holographic map in front of him. His mission was simple, or at least it should have been. Scout a few derelict war zones left behind after the galactic conflict. He had seen enough destruction during the war, but now, as a part of the peacekeeping effort, he was tasked with finding any remnants of the enemy and making sure no one was left behind. The soldier was tired, both mentally and physically. His body was bruised from years of fighting, and his mind had been scared by the horrors he had witnessed. But this mission was different. As he scrolled through data on his ship's screen, a strange signal caught his attention. It was weak, a faint echo, but it was enough to pull him away from his usual tasks. His curiosity got the better of him, and he decided to investigate. The soldier, despite his exhaustion, couldn't shake the feeling that something important was waiting for him at the source of the signal. He adjusted the coordinates and steered his ship towards the origin of the signal, a planet marked on his map as uninhabited and largely unexplored. He had never been there, and he had no reason to go. But the signal, it felt like a whisper, calling to him. The landing was rough. The planet's surface was barren, scared by the remnants of past battles. There were no signs of life, no buildings, just endless stretches of dusty terrain. As he stepped out of his ship, the air was dry, and the silence was almost overwhelming. The soldier kept his blaster close, instinctively scanning the horizon for any threats. The signal was stronger now, leading him towards a ruined structure. It looked like it had been part of some kind of research facility, now crumbled and abandoned. Inside, the soldier found only debris and broken equipment. But then, something moved in the shadows. At first, he thought it was just his mind playing tricks. But as he approached, he saw it, an alien child, curled up on the cold floor, weak and barely conscious. The soldier's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure why, but something about the child felt familiar. The child's features were unmistakable. Pale skin, small alien ears, and the royal insignia that marked the child's lineage. It was the lost prince, the son of the alien queen. The soldier's heart raced. He knew this child had been believed dead, killed during the war. But there he was, alive. The soldier had no idea how or why the child had been abandoned on this desolate planet, but one thing was clear: he had to protect him. Without hesitation, he scooped up the child, holding him gently but securely. The boy was light, too light, as if his strength had been drained. The soldier knew he couldn't leave him here. He had to get him back. The mission had just changed. Now it was about saving this child, and somehow finding a way to return him to his people. The soldier's mind raced with questions. How had the child survived? Why was he left behind? And most importantly, what would the alien queen say when she learned her son was alive? The soldier's mission had just become far more dangerous. He had no idea what he was walking into. But he knew one thing: he couldn't turn back now. The queen sat in her private chambers, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. The walls were lined with ancient tapestries depicting battles won and glorious victories, but today they seemed hollow. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of pain and sorrow, each memory of her son cutting deeper than the last. She had been a powerful ruler, feared across the galaxy, but nothing, not all the strength in her empire, could ease the hollow ache inside her chest. It had been weeks since the reports of her son's death had reached her. She had locked herself away from the world, unwilling to meet anyone's gaze. Even her most trusted advisors had been kept at a distance. They had tried to comfort her, to guide her, but she couldn't bear their words. Her heart simply could not accept that her child was gone. She had given everything for her people, led them through battles, made difficult decisions, sacrificed so much. But in the end, the one thing she couldn't protect was her son. The thought of his small body lying cold on some distant battlefield haunted her every waking moment. And still there was a part of her that clung to the smallest shred of hope. There had been no body, no real proof that he was dead. But that hope, fragile as it was, seemed impossible to hold on to in the face of all that had happened. The queen stood and walked over to the balcony, looking out at her empire sprawling below her. The stars in the sky were a reminder of everything she had lost, and yet they also whispered to her. Somewhere out there, her son might still be alive. She didn't know how, but she could feel it in her bones. It was a fleeting thought, one she quickly shoved away. But it stayed, a silent whisper that refused to be silenced. Suddenly, the door to her chambers opened, breaking her from her thoughts. Her most trusted advisor, Commander Zalin, entered, his expression grim. He had been by her side for years, through every victory and defeat, but today he was more cautious than ever. "Your Majesty," he said softly, bowing his head in respect, "there is something you must see." The queen turned to him, her eyes cold but full of a quiet desperation. "What is it?" "A human soldier," Commander Zalin continued. "He claims to have found something, someone, that belongs to you." The queen felt her breath catch in her throat. A human. Why would a human soldier come to her, especially now? "What is this about?" she demanded, though her voice cracked slightly. Zalin hesitated, then gestured for her to follow him. "Please, Your Majesty, I think you need to see this for yourself." With no more words, the queen followed him through the corridors of her palace, her mind racing. The idea that a human soldier, of all people, might have found something of importance seemed absurd. But deep down, the faintest glimmer of hope flickered again. Could it be? Was there a chance, after all, that her son might not be dead? The walk to the royal meeting hall felt like an eternity. Her heart pounded in her chest with every step. She couldn't explain it, but the closer she got, the more she felt something stir within her. Could this be the moment she had been waiting for? The moment when everything changed? As they reached the door to the hall, she stopped for a moment, steadying herself. This could be nothing, but it could also be everything. With a steadying breath, she stepped inside. The queen stepped into the meeting hall, her heart pounding in her chest. She was greeted by a room full of her closest advisors, their faces filled with curiosity and uncertainty. But at the center of the room stood the human soldier, a figure that seemed out of place in the grandeur of her palace. His uniform was worn, his face rough from the trials of war, but his eyes, those eyes told a different story. There was something in them, something that made the queen pause. He was standing next to a small, frail figure, a child. The queen's breath caught in her throat as she saw the boy. He was too weak to stand on his own, leaning on the soldier for support. But the moment her eyes locked with his, she knew. The child before her was her son, the heir to her throne. The human soldier seemed to sense the queen's shock, and he spoke quickly. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice rough but steady. "I found him. He was alive. He's your son." The queen didn't respond immediately. She couldn't. The words were too much, too impossible. She had mourned for so long, and now, standing before her, was the child she had thought she lost forever. Her heart ached with a mixture of joy and disbelief. She wanted to rush forward, to take him in her arms and never let go, but she stood frozen in place, unable to believe it was real. The soldier looked at her, his face softening. "He was left behind," he said, his voice filled with compassion. "I found him on a deserted planet, barely alive. He's been through a lot, Your Majesty, but he's here. He's safe now." For a long moment, the queen simply stared at her son, who was now looking up at her with wide, uncertain eyes. His once bright skin was pale, and his body was frail. The war had taken its toll on him, but he was alive. That was all that mattered. Finally, the queen took a step forward, her hands trembling. She reached out, slowly, as if afraid that if she moved too quickly, the dream might shatter. The soldier gently guided the child to her, and as the boy's small hand touched hers, the queen felt a surge of warmth flood through her. The bond between mother and child, forged in the most painful of circumstances, was stronger than ever. "My son," the queen whispered, her voice breaking. "You're really here." Tears welled in her eyes, though she quickly wiped them away. She had never allowed herself to cry in front of others. But in that moment, she couldn't hold back. Her heart was overflowing with emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel in so long. The soldier watched silently, giving the queen a moment to embrace her son. He knew how much this meant to her. He had seen the war, the pain, the loss. He had lived through it all. But to see the queen's grief and her relief, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of respect for her strength. The queen finally looked up at the soldier, her eyes still filled with emotion. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why did you bring him back? You're a human. You have no reason to help me." The soldier met her gaze without hesitation. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said simply. "Because your son deserves to be with you." The queen studied him for a moment, and for the first time since the war began, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a future beyond the pain and loss. But that future would not come easily. There were many questions, many dangers still ahead. But for now, she had her son back. That was enough. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but filled with gratitude. "You've given me back what I thought I'd lost forever." The soldier gave a slight nod, knowing that his mission was far from over. But in that moment, as he saw the queen reunited with her son, he knew he had made the right choice. The queen stood in the center of the grand hall, holding her son close, the weight of the moment heavy in the air. The advisors around her were still in shock, unable to believe what had just happened. The human soldier, standing off to the side, watched quietly. He had expected to be met with suspicion, perhaps even anger, but instead he was witnessing something else entirely. The queen, a ruler of immense power, had tears in her eyes as she held the child she had thought lost forever. But even in this emotional moment, the reality of the situation could not be ignored. The war had ravaged both the human and alien forces, and there was still much to be done. The queen's people, the loyal citizens of her empire, had been struggling, and many factions within her court were already questioning the soldier's presence. "I cannot believe what I am seeing," one of the queen's high-ranking generals muttered, unable to hide his disbelief. "A human, bringing the prince back. This cannot be true." The queen's gaze turned sharply toward him. She could feel the tension in the room, but there was no room for doubt now. Her son was alive, and she owed that to the soldier standing in front of her. "Commander Xalin," the queen spoke calmly, her voice a commanding presence. "This soldier has brought my son back to me. We owe him our gratitude." Xalin, the commander, hesitated. His eyes flicked between the queen and the soldier, his distrust evident. "But your majesty," he began, "he is a human. After everything that has happened in the war, how can we trust him?" The queen, still holding her son, turned her full attention to her commander. She understood the hesitation, the lingering distrust of humans that had built up during the war. But she had seen the soldier's sincerity, and that was enough for her. "Commander," she said firmly, "this soldier has given me what no one else could. My son is alive because of him. That is all that matters right now." The room grew quiet as the weight of her words settled on everyone. Xalin, though still clearly uneasy, nodded reluctantly. The queen's decision was final, and there was no use in arguing further. The soldier, feeling the tension, cleared his throat. "I understand that this isn't easy to accept," he said quietly, "but I came here to help. Your son deserves to be with his people, and I'll help however I can." His words were simple, but they carried weight. The room fell into an uneasy silence as the queen considered his offer. She had to admit, his actions had already proven his worth. The soldier had saved her son when no one else could, and she couldn't ignore that. "I believe you," she said finally, looking up at the soldier. "But this is only the beginning. We have much to face together, human." The soldier nodded. "I'm ready to help in any way I can, Your Majesty." From that moment, an unlikely alliance was born. The human soldier, once an enemy in the eyes of the aliens, was now a protector of their future. There was still much to be done, and the war was far from over. But for the first time in years, the Queen felt a sense of hope stirring in her heart. Maybe, with this unexpected ally, there was a chance to heal the wounds of the past and build something new. As the Queen looked down at her son, she knew this was only the beginning of a much larger journey. Together, with the human soldier by her side, they would face whatever came next, united, no matter the challenges ahead. The days that followed the reunion were tense. The Queen's people, though relieved to see the prince alive, still struggled to understand how a human soldier had managed to bring him back. The whispers in the palace were growing louder. Some believed the soldier's actions were a miracle, while others feared it was a trap. But the Queen remained focused. For the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope. Her son, now recovering, was being carefully tended to by the finest healers in the empire. But the emotional toll of the war still weighed heavily on him. He was scared, confused, and uncertain of the world around him. The Queen had been keeping him close, not just to protect him, but because she wasn't ready to let go of the miracle that had returned to her. The soldier, on the other hand, was an outsider in this alien world. Though the Queen had accepted his help, she knew that trust could not be built in a day. He had saved her son's life, but his presence in the palace was still a matter of concern for many. Some of her closest advisors suggested that she send him away for his safety, not wanting to risk any more conflict with the humans. The Queen stood before a large ancient mirror in her private chambers, staring at her reflection. Her face was weary, her eyes heavy from sleepless nights filled with questions. The child she had thought lost forever was now with her again. But the war was still far from over. The galaxy was torn, and her people were divided. Would her alliance with this human soldier be enough to stop the chaos? There was a knock at her door. She turned sharply, wiping away a tear that had escaped without her realizing. "Come in," she called. The soldier entered, his uniform as worn as ever, his face shadowed by the weight of their situation. He stood at attention, but the Queen noticed how his posture softened when he saw her. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, "I know this is hard for you, but you have to trust that my intentions are pure. I didn't bring your son back for any gain. I only did it because it was the right thing to do." The Queen took a deep breath, weighing his words. She had wanted to be alone to think, to grieve, to understand what all of this meant for her people. But standing here before her, this soldier, this human, had already given her more than anyone else could. "You've done more for me than I ever expected," she said finally, her voice steady but soft. "I have no reason to doubt your loyalty, but you must understand. I am the Queen of this empire. My first duty is to my people. And right now, they do not trust you." The soldier nodded, not offended but understanding the weight of her words. "I get it. I'm an outsider. But if you give me a chance, Your Majesty, I will prove myself." The Queen looked at him, studying his face for any sign of deceit. She saw none. She had learned long ago to trust her instincts, and right now, they were telling her to give him that chance. She stood up, her decision finally made. "You have my trust, soldier," she said firmly. "But you must know this. We will face many challenges together. The road ahead will not be easy. And if you fail me, if you fail my son, you will never leave this planet alive." The soldier's eyes widened slightly, but he held her gaze, his voice unwavering. "I won't fail you, Your Majesty. I promise." The Queen nodded, a sense of finality in her gesture. "Then we are allies, and together we will rebuild what has been lost." For the first time since her son's disappearance, the Queen felt the weight of the galaxy shift ever so slightly. It wasn't a perfect solution. There was much left to do. But in this moment, she felt the strength of unity, of unlikely allies coming together for a greater cause. And as the soldier stood there, ready to face whatever came next, He knew that the future they would build would require more than just strength. It would require trust. The alliance between the Queen and the human soldier had begun to take shape, but the challenges ahead were far from over. The galaxy was still in turmoil, and whispers of rebellion and unrest spread across the alien empire. The Queen had trusted the soldier, but many of her people were not ready to embrace the idea of peace with humans. Some saw the soldier's presence as a betrayal, an opening for human influence to seep into their world. But the Queen had made her decision, and there was no turning back now. In the royal war room, the Queen stood before a large map of the galaxy, her eyes scanning the stars. The situation had grown dire. The Empire was under constant threat from factions who saw their alliance with humans as a weakness. Even worse, the true enemy, the one who had secretly manipulated events during the war, was still out there, waiting for the right moment to strike. The soldier, now an official member of the Queen's Council, stood beside her. His hands were folded behind his back, and his eyes were fixed on the map as well. He had spent weeks learning about the Empire's politics, its enemies, and the fractured alliances that had formed during the war. He knew that their unity, fragile as it was, would be tested to its limits. "Your Majesty," the soldier said, his voice low but steady, "we cannot ignore the threat much longer. The enemy is getting closer, and if we don't act now, we risk losing everything." The Queen turned to him, her face hardening. She knew he was right. The time for caution had passed. It was time to strike back. But the question was, how? Her people were still divided, and she couldn't risk a full-scale war without their support. Yet, every minute spent in hesitation allowed their enemies to grow stronger. Just then, the doors to the war room opened, and Commander Xalan entered, followed by a group of trusted soldiers. His expression was grim. "Your Majesty," Xalan said, bowing slightly, "we've discovered something troubling." The Queen raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. "What is it, Commander?" Xalan stepped forward and handed her a small data device. "The traitors in our ranks are more than we thought. There is a faction within the Empire that has been secretly working with the enemy. They've been feeding them information, sabotaging our efforts, and preparing for an uprising." The Queen's heart sank. She had suspected something like this, but hearing it confirmed was another blow. Her own people, her own generals, had betrayed her. The weight of the betrayal was almost unbearable. The soldier stepped forward, his expression determined. "We'll deal with them. Together." The Queen turned to him, her gaze intense. "But we must move quickly. If we don't take action now, the entire empire will fall." She turned to Xalan. "Prepare the troops. We leave at dawn." Xalan nodded, and the room quickly fell into a flurry of preparation. The Queen and the soldier exchanged a brief look, both knowing that this was their last chance to save their people. As night fell over the palace, the Queen stood alone on her balcony, staring out at the darkened landscape. The weight of the decision pressed on her chest. She had already lost so much, and now she risked losing everything again. But she had no choice. The future of her people, of her son, depended on the choices she made in the next few hours. The soldier joined her on the balcony, standing quietly by her side. "We'll get through this," he said softly, his tone steady. "Together." The Queen didn't say anything, but the small flicker of hope in her chest grew brighter. They had come this far, and she wasn't going to let her empire fall without a fight. The final confrontation was coming. And with it, everything would change. The air was tense as the Queen stood at the head of her army, looking out over the battlefield. Her forces were ready, but the uncertainty of the coming fight weighed heavily on her. For weeks, she had planned, strategized, and made alliances, but she still didn't know if it would be enough. The enemy was strong, and their forces had been growing in number. But she was determined to protect her people and reclaim the peace that had been stolen from them. Beside her, the human soldier stood silently, his face grim but resolute. Though the Queen had accepted him as an ally, there were still many in her ranks who didn't trust him. The tension was palpable, but he had proven himself time and again. He had brought her son back, and he had stood by her side when no one else would. But now, as the queen prepared to face the final battle, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the responsibility on her shoulders. "We're ready, Your Majesty," Commander Xalan said as he approached, his voice steady but filled with concern. "The enemy is massing their forces on the western plains. We have the element of surprise, but we must move quickly." The queen nodded, her eyes scanning the horizon. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the battlefield. She had hoped it wouldn't come to this, but now there was no turning back. The enemy had pushed too far, and the people of her empire had suffered too much. "Prepare the troops," the queen ordered, her voice firm. "We march at dawn." The soldiers began moving quickly, preparing their weapons and organizing into squads. The queen's mind raced as she thought of her son, who was safely hidden away in the palace. He was too young to be part of this fight, but she couldn't bear the thought of losing him again. She had made a promise to him, to give him a future, and now she would fight to make sure that promise was kept. As the night drew on, the queen found herself alone, walking in the quiet garden behind the palace. The stars were just beginning to appear, and the cool night air helped clear her mind. She had come so far, and now it all came down to this. The fate of her people, the future of her son, it all rested on the outcome of the battle ahead. The soldier approached her, his footsteps soft on the stone path. He had been with her through so much, and though their worlds were different, she had come to trust him more than she ever thought possible. "You don't have to do this alone," he said, his voice low and comforting. The queen looked up at him, meeting his steady gaze. "I know," she replied softly, "but this is my fight. It always has been. You've helped me more than I could ever repay. But this is for my people." He stepped closer, his eyes filled with quiet understanding. "I'll fight by your side, no matter what happens. You're not alone, Your Majesty. Not anymore." For a moment, the queen simply stood there, feeling the weight of his words. She had never expected to find someone she could trust so completely, someone who wasn't part of her world, but still fought for it. The soldier had become more than just an ally. He had become a friend. The queen took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. The battle would be fierce, and the road ahead uncertain. But she knew now, more than ever, that they would face it together. "We'll win this," she said, her voice strong. "And when it's over, we'll rebuild. For our people. For the future." The soldier nodded, his expression unwavering. "For the future." As the night deepened, the queen looked up at the stars once more. The future seemed impossibly far away, but she knew that if they fought together, they would make it, no matter what came next. The morning sun rose slowly over the battlefield, casting a pale light on the gathering forces. The queen stood at the forefront of her army, her eyes scanning the horizon where the enemy's troops were preparing for battle. Today would be the deciding day. Her empire's fate, her people's future, depended on the events about to unfold. Beside her, the human soldier stood, his posture steady, his face calm. Over the past few days, he had proven himself more than just a soldier. He had become her trusted ally. But today, the stakes were higher than ever. The enemy forces were massive, and the division within her empire was still present. Yet she knew that with him by her side, they had a chance. The soldier turned to her, his voice low but confident. "We can win this, Your Majesty. We've got the advantage of surprise, and your people are ready." The queen nodded but didn't answer immediately. Her mind was racing. She had seen so much loss in her life, and this battle was no different. The weight of her decisions that had brought this war to a head, hung heavily on her. She couldn't afford to fail now. Commander Xalan approached, his face grim. "Your Majesty, the enemy is moving into position. They know we're here. They'll strike soon." The queen took a deep breath and turned her attention to the battle plans spread across the map in front of her. She had been up all night, finalizing the details of the assault, making sure every move was carefully calculated. She couldn't afford to make any mistakes. "It's time," she said, her voice strong. "We attack at first light. Give the signal." Helen nodded and moved off to rally the troops. The soldiers, though nervous, were eager. The Queen's decision to fight had united them in a way that words never could. They trusted her, and that trust gave them the strength they needed to fight. As the soldiers prepared, the Queen's son was far from the battlefield, safe within the palace walls, protected by her most trusted guards. She had promised him that he would never have to face the horrors of war. But today, that promise felt more fragile than ever. The reality of leadership had forced her to make choices she never wanted to make. The sound of marching boots grew louder as the Queen's army moved into position. The human soldiers stood beside her once more, ready for the fight ahead. They were no longer just allies. They had become something stronger, partners in the struggle for survival. "I've never fought with anyone like you before," the soldier said quietly, his voice filled with respect. The Queen looked at him, her expression unwavering. "The battle is the same for all of us. What matters is how we fight it." The enemy finally appeared over the ridge, their ranks stretching out as far as the eye could see. The Queen's army was smaller, but their spirits were strong. She took a deep breath, then gave the signal to attack. The battle began with a roar, the clash of metal ringing out across the battlefield. The Queen's forces charged forward, her heart pounding in her chest. The soldier fought beside her, moving with precision and determination, taking down enemy soldiers with swift strikes. Despite their numbers, the enemy seemed to falter in the face of the Queen's resolve. The Queen was everywhere at once, leading her soldiers, giving orders, ensuring that every strike hit its mark. Her people fought with everything they had, and slowly the tide began to turn. The enemy, overwhelmed by the fierce resistance, began to retreat. But just as victory seemed within reach, the enemy's leader, an imposing figure in dark armor, emerged from the shadows, cutting down soldiers left and right. The Queen's heart skipped a beat. This was the final challenge, the one that would determine everything. The human soldier turned to her, his eyes hard with determination. "I'll handle this," he said, rushing toward the enemy leader. The Queen watched him go, a mixture of fear and hope filling her chest. She couldn't lose him, not now, but she knew that he was their best chance. She had to trust him. As the battle raged on around them, the Queen felt a surge of strength. They were winning, but the final blow still had to be struck. And with the human soldier leading the charge, she believed they had a chance. The galaxy's fate would be decided here, today. The clash of weapons slowly faded into silence, replaced by the distant sounds of retreating enemies and the heavy breathing of exhausted soldiers. The battlefield, once a place of chaos and bloodshed, now lay still under the rising sun. The Queen stood at the center of the war zone, her armor smeared with dirt and blood, but her eyes were clear, focused, and filled with a deep sense of triumph. Victory had been hard-earned. Her forces had been outnumbered, but their spirit had proven stronger. The human soldier, standing beside her, had been instrumental in turning the tide. Together, they had faced an enemy that seemed unbeatable, and they had emerged victorious. The Queen's gaze turned to the horizon, where the smoke of the battle still lingered in the distance. The war was over, but the true work of rebuilding had just begun. She could already feel the weight of the future pressing on her, but for the first time in a long time, there was hope. "You did it," the soldier said quietly, his voice full of respect. "We did it." The Queen nodded, her expression softening for a moment. "We couldn't have done it without you," she said, her words sincere. "Your courage, your loyalty, it's something I never expected from a human. I was wrong to doubt you." The soldier gave a small smile. "We've both learned a lot, I think." The Queen looked over her people, her warriors who were now regrouping and tending to the wounded. She had led them through the darkest moments of their history, And now they stood on the edge of a new era. It was up to her to guide them through the rebuilding, to ensure that this victory wasn't just the end of one war, but the beginning of something better. "I'm not sure where to start," the Queen admitted, her voice tinged with uncertainty. The soldier placed a hand on her shoulder, offering his support. "One step at a time," he said. "You've already proven you're more than capable of leading them. You just need to show them that the future doesn't have to be like the past." The Queen turned to him, her eyes meeting his with a mix of gratitude and determination. "We'll rebuild. Together." The battle was over, but the peace was fragile. The Queen knew there would be more challenges ahead, more enemies to face, more divisions to heal. But she also knew that with the soldier by her side, and with her people's unwavering support, they had a chance to create something better. For the first time, she felt the weight of leadership as something she could carry, not a burden that would crush her. She had learned to trust others, to lean on allies, and to believe that there was strength in unity. As the Queen walked back toward her palace, her son waiting for her inside, the soldier by her side, she felt a quiet sense of peace. The road ahead would not be easy, but she was no longer alone. Together, they would forge a future that neither humans nor aliens had ever imagined. The future was theirs to shape, and it began now.